She Can, we tell women's stories. We interview women from all walks of life in different parts of the world because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Jos Boys today. Jos, welcome to She Can. You're an architecturally trained activist, educator, artist, and writer. Guest professor at the Royal Danish School of Design. And you are also the co-founder and co-director at the DisOrdinary Architecture Project with the disabled artist Zoe Partington. You bring together disabled artists and students, educators, and practitioners for positive and creative actions and dialogue showing that disability is a valuable force in design. You're also a co-founder of the Matrix Feminist Architecture and Research Collective and co-authored a book called Making Space, Women in the Man-Made Environment. Jos, tell us a bit more about yourself and what you are doing at this point in time.
Thank you for that introduction, Stephanie. Well, what I'm doing at this point in time, I think, does need a little background because my background is in architecture. I studied architecture at the Bartlett UCL in the 1970s. So I was one of a whole group of post-war white middle-class women who began to enter that field in the 1960s and 1970s and 80s. And since then, I've worked as an architectural journalist, as a researcher, teacher, and writer, all the things you've mentioned. And yes, really, I think what I define myself as is a design activist. And most recently, of course, that is with the DisOrdinary Architecture Project, which Zoe and I set up in 2007. And we set it up really, we just had an informal conversation coming from quite different backgrounds. For her, the problem with the way that architecture thought about disability was she'd been kind of campaigning as a blind artist. She'd been campaigning for many years against it. And then I came to it as somebody who'd studied architecture in the 1970s and couldn't quite believe how nothing had really changed, that the way that the built environment is designed, it's designed kind of for normal people. And then right at the end, there's kind of all these extra bits and pieces that just get added on rather half-heartedly for people who got left out in the first place. So we thought we'd really like to find other ways, really, find new ways of engaging. And that's really what we've been doing ever since. We're a not-for-profit and informal platform. I mean, the diverse disabled artists that we work with, it's really done on a project-by-project basis. So we bring people in when we need them, and we've done a lot of workshops into architecture schools. We do a lot of kind of alternative consultancy, I guess, with architectural practices. But we also are increasingly doing kind of design provocations and architectural interventions, small spatial interventions into public space.
Jos, which is really you have an incredible CV. You've done so many decades of incredibly important and disruptive work. When did you realize I am a kind of a disruptor? I want to bring about change. How did that come about? When did you realize that?
That's a really good question, because I think I realized it really early on. There's a very well-known disability studies scholar called Rosemary Garland Thompson. And when she's talking about the way that we all interact with the world and with each other, she uses this expression of fitting and misfitting. So rather than dividing the world into, say, disabled and non-disabled people, she sees it as being relational. It's like the encounters that you have that affect whether you feel comfortable and you fit in particular circumstances or you misfit. And I think that was really useful for me, not just in terms of what we do with DisOrdinary, but because it made me realize that I never quite felt that I'd fitted. I just had, even at architecture school, I just had this sort of very deep sense that I just didn't align with the kind of dominant stories that got told about how the world worked. And that was either, that was about whether it was about getting married and settling down, that's what women did, or it was about the way that women should be interior designers, not architects, or about the way that architecture seemed to operate like a kind of gentleman's club, and that the way that it was taught and the way that it was discussed just didn't make any sense to me in terms of my own history and experience. So that, and I was just really interested in what that was, why I couldn't kind of conform, and it's not because I'm, you know, difficult. It just didn't make sense to me in a way that it appeared to make sense to a lot of my classmates.
Yeah.
But it's also true that London in that period in the 1970s and 80s was a very different sort of place. Like, it was very run down. There was a lot of squatting. There was a lot of community action. As a group of people coming out of our undergraduate courses, we could live quite cheaply. We could find part-time work very easily. A lot of us did squat. I squatted in Covent Garden. And I think I made a decision quite early on that I would live as cheaply as possible so that I could do what I wanted, and that I could find a place that worked for me where I kind of fitted. So that included, you know, being a single parent living on a boat when my daughter was little in central London at a time when that wasn't very common or considered normal. And also, I think it was about doing a lot of different things, again, at a time when it was much easier to be kind of multidisciplinary. So I worked for the Architectural Press. I had a job with building design for a bit, and I freelanced. I did some photography. I did some research. I worked as an academic. I did community-based practice. It was possible to do all sorts of different things. And as part of that, of course, not only did I find lots of opportunities, but also really wonderful, like-minded people to work with. And that was, to be able to do that, I think, to find ways of doing that was just really powerful.
Jos, so with all of this experience and all of these incredible projects that you've done over the years, what would you say is your main motivator? And what is your big vision going forwards? Is it really to make the spaces that we inhabit much more inclusive?
I think in terms of motivation, it comes out of what I've said already, really. It is, I'm just always love to learn new things. I think it's a huge privilege to be able to spend time to learn. And I love working with people who open up possibilities rather than shut them down, and particularly possibilities about working more equitably, thinking and working more equitably. And I think in terms of motivation, one of the great joys of working with disabled artists, designers, and architects who are involved with disorderly architecture is that there's an openness that comes out of human beings' rich neuro and biodiversity, which is often kind of ignored or marginalized. And so I think for me, that's a real commitment and a real, there's a kind of creative anger, I think, in really fighting discrimination, which I think motivates me.
Yeah.
And in terms of what that means in the, you know, in ongoing work and kind of the future, I think, and this is with Zoe too, I think, and the DisOrdinary Architecture Project, we're always trying to learn new ways of doing things and test that they work. And I think then we're also really interested in how we can make more impact with less. I think one of the big issues about setting up in the way that we did, without really thinking how long we'd go on, you know, we've been going for nearly 15 years, more than 15 years, and that wasn't, I don't think we thought about that when we started. And it means that because we work in this project by project way, we don't really, Zoe and I do a lot of things for free. We do all the kind of back of house stuff, like a lot of small organizations do. We do our own, you know, we do our own bookkeeping that's often not paid for.
Yeah.
We do all the pitching, all the things that you have to do to, you know, all the project management. So we've been increasingly interested, I think, in our kind of intention for the future is how we can organize in a way where we can make the most impact without running ourselves and the artists we work with into the ground.
Yeah, I think that's a real issue for many smaller, but even, you know, not even that small organizations of any kind. Jos, so what would you say are your top qualities? What are the qualities that really serve you every day with all your projects?
I guess, I mean, the most importantly for me, I think, as at a deep level, I think working out that misfitting can be a kind of strength, that it takes time to recognize how to use that sense of not you know, just being able to sort of slide into normative ways of being, or sort of feeling different and kind of out of it, of not kind of knowing how to communicate, or even feeling that people don't really hear what you're saying. But as I got older, I think I've been much better at using that sense of needing to explore the kind of nuances and complexities of this world and what needs repairing in it, and doing that through being able to talk and write and make work with others. And I think I do have a good quality. I am a good project manager. Sometimes I don't want to be the one that does it, but I think I'm quite good at doing it. And I think I've got increasingly good at, and I'm very lucky. I don't find public speaking frightening. I do get anxious like everybody does, but over the years, I enjoy standing up on that platform or that stage and trying to persuade people in a very open way about the things that I think are important, particularly at the moment around disability and the design of the built environment.
Jos, so I'm wondering, what tips would you give to people who are listening, who feel like they want to break out, they want to do things differently, they want to be the brave and the bold people that break out of our normal spaces and bring about change?
I think, I mean, it's really interesting for me because how things have changed quite a lot. Well, they've changed globally, but since the kind of the 60s and the 70s. And it feels like in the global north, we now live in a kind of intensely competitive neoliberal capitalist society that really aims to set people against one another. Yeah. And it uses simplistic stereotypes that aim to name some people as bad, and that can be disabled, it can be transgender people, it can be immigrants, homeless, the poor, fat people. You know, there's like loads of people who could become targets. Yeah. And against this, it's like if you want to be one of the good people, you find yourself judged against those kind of people who are being marginalized and labeled. And I think that it's really important. So I guess, I mean, it's an odd tip really, but it is that we should be looking, that there's so much to learn, I think, from that sense of solidarity and support for each other among women. And of course, that's, you know, there's a whole range of different intersecting things that affect what different women's experience is. And so I think I'm really interested in how we can go beyond kind of an idea, for example, of empathy, that we should have empathy for other people, that in disability activism, concepts like empathy and inclusion are critiqued because they don't demand anything the person doing the inclusion. So it's like, I'm here, I include you in, I have empathy for you, but I don't have to change. And I guess it's a kind of hard top tip, but it is about how each of us, in wanting to make an impact on the world, has also to learn and change ourselves. And I guess for me around, and it does come out of the disability politics really, I think this kind of stereotyping, you know, we don't live these stereotypes, we live our relationships to them, but they're also underpinned by pressures to be endlessly productive, to be aspirational. And there are a lot of ways in which that plays out for women. It will play out differently for women who are white or people of color, women of color, or poorer people. But it's a really strong pressure in a neoliberal society. So I guess every way we can resist those sorts of pressures, whether that's individually or collectively, at however small a scale, that's really important. And there's a really lovely movement at the moment among disabled activists and others called Rest as Resistance. And it's a kind of refusal to get caught up in the pressure that I know we all feel, and women feel in particular ways because of how we're framed by society, to kind of always be on, to be doing everything, to be good at everything, to be incredibly fit and have everything kind of under control. And I think that part of, on the one hand, I'm saying, commitment is really important. And on the other, I think there's a sense of, in restless resistance, that we also need to take care of ourselves and of others, and that not complying with those neoliberal pressures, finding ways around it, alternative ways to just more consumption, small ways, the way we work with, the way we help each other out, I think is just, I feel like that's really important at this moment in the way the world's going.
Joss, I think what you just said is so important, and I think we have had various directors and film directors and films playing this out over the course of the past year, and so amazing. Thank you so much for talking about it. I'm wondering what you think are your biggest challenges.
I think the biggest challenges for me, I guess, has always been, and again, I think I'm not alone in this, is I somehow ended up as a design activist. That is definitely what I am. It's like written as a tattoo somehow along my arm. And so I do feel a real social commitment and a kind of need to kind of work with others to try and make some improvements, particularly in my case, to the built environment. But that kind of sense of social commitment, it always has a tension with how you need to earn a living. And I think for my generation, that was easier than it is today in the 70s and the 80s. Now living costs are much higher. We had very low, we could manage with very low overheads. And so unlike many younger women today, the women that I work with, the younger women that I work with, they tend to be working in some sort of unsatisfactory full-time paid employment. And then they do amazing volunteer, unpaid side hustles, which are around something that they love doing. And I have so much respect for that. And I see people doing that in ways, women doing that in ways that are really powerful and have impact. But I guess for me, coming from this kind of longer history, I think I'm just really interested in the way that I navigate this kind of need to be socially committed is around having really low overheads. I don't have an expensive flat. I don't drive a car. I try and live quite locally. I'm lucky enough to have a veg plot. And as I say, over the years, I've lived on boats quite a lot. So I think it's just being very, like we all face that tension.
Yeah.
We all find ways around it. And that I've been really lucky, I think, that I've been able to find that way of living cheaply.
Yeah, living cheaply and also living so intentionally, right? Really living in your purpose, which is an amazing, and we need more role models around that. What do you think is your biggest achievement to date? What are you most proud of?
Well, quite a lot of things, I guess. I mean, including my wonderful daughter and surviving and thriving despite a pretty difficult childhood. But I feel like the DisOrdinary Architecture Project, I think I've said before, was this rather absent-minded thing that Zoe and I set up, which we just, we've always worked doing other things as well. It's not like for neither of us has ever been a main job, and we've never kind of sorted out how we might organize that a bit better. But more as we've grown and become more well known, I guess, internationally, we just get projects now. I mean, it's very much to do with who comes to us. We get projects that are just really exciting. So as an example of the sort of work we do that I feel very proud of, we worked with the Bartlett Faculty of Built Environment at UCL over several years, running a course for blind and partially sighted people who want to be architects. And that's very deliberately. This was commissioned by the dean at the time, Alan Penn, who was really interested in the idea that architecture might be that it was kind of overly visual. And that was a problem in terms of the design of space. Like, it isn't just about the visual, it's about all our senses and about our whole embodied experience. And he also thought the way that architects, like, you know, that you get taught to draw in these incredibly gorgeous, exquisite, and very detailed and kind of incomprehensible ways, incomprehensible by people outside the field. And so he had this idea. He'd met a blind architect called Carlos Pereira in Portugal. And he had this idea that if we had more blind and partially sighted people in architecture, we'd need to change our design methods. Again, it wasn't about inclusion. It wasn't just enabling more partially sighted people to fit with the existing profession. It was saying, what does that mean? How does that make a change? And we've run that course now. We ran some development workshops. We did it as we always do. We worked in a very participatory and very slow way. And it was affected quite badly by a gap with COVID. But we've run that course with blind and partially sighted participants and led by blind and partially sighted tutors now a couple of times. And it's just so exciting to be in a space which is about design, where all the people in it are engaging with that space in a very creative and different way.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, you go on, Jos. If you've got something else to add, then absolutely.
Well, I guess, yeah. So I think the other, another project that came up, as I said, we started to do more spatial interventions. So because we often get asked, you know, we're really interested, I think, in how you change attitudes and practices. I think a strong belief in the DisOrdinary Architecture Project is, until we change the way that architects work and the way they think about people, let alone disabled people, about users, we will go on having problems in terms of having a richness of ways of occupying built space. But people always say, you know, well, can you give us an example of that? And we're like, well, it's quite complicated. And we, this last year round, as part of the London Festival of Architecture, we worked with a really great group called Refabricate, who are very interested in the waste economy and are all in, you know, exactly doing this as the most fantastic and very committed side hustle. Really brilliant people to work with. And we looked at a site in, we won a competition to do a project called Seats at the Table, and we looked at a site in central London called Postman's Park in the City of London. And we were able to do just a lot of quite quiet interventions that weren't expensive, that were around making more places to rest, making some of the things in the park more accessible to blind and partially sighted people, making the whole place much easier to navigate for all sorts of people, whatever their disability or preference. And we made this, we had these, a whole range of school children designed chairs, very different kinds of chairs, different ways of sitting and being at the table. And we held events, and it felt like a very connected way of bringing things together, thinking across sustainability and accessibility, not treating them as if they're separate, seeing them all part of the way that we need to have ways of having much more of a kind of care and repair attitude to the world, you know, not just exploiting and extracting it, and exploiting and extracting human beings. So it's very small, just temporary, ran for a month, and June 2023. But yeah, it felt like with the right, you know, that there is a groundswell, I think, and there's just so many people, you know, where those sorts of connections can be made, and you can actually really begin to do, again, always small scale. I don't have any problem with the small scale. I think that the way things change is it's a kind of snowballing. Attitudes change. I think we see, you know, we saw it from second wave feminism. You get to a critical mass of attitudes changing. You have to kind of start in a small way, in a kind of, and our whole argument is that, you know, disability needs to start out as being kind of avant-garde and cool in architecture. And then when you move on, you know, that's how things become mainstream. They start out by being cool, and access and inclusion has never been cool in architecture. So the intention to make it so, and it's not just us, there's a whole incoming group of campaigning young disabled people into architecture school, which is very exciting. It's like, and they're kind of beginning to lead the way. So things are happening, and they're not, DisOrdinary Architecture doesn't start that. Those people are leading on that.
Yeah, amazing. Jos, so I'm wondering, what are your plans, your goals for the next years?
Well, I think they're twofold. One is grows out of what I already mentioned about Zoe and I feeling like we somehow got ourselves caught as freelancers in a position where we were doing lots of work for free, and that it'd be good to move away from that. And so we managed to get some funding from the Supporting Acts Foundation, who fund kind of back of house activities. I think they're fantastic. They fund, again, those things that we talked about before, that if you run a small organization or even a bigger organization, but you're doing it in a kind of socially committed way, that there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get covered by the kind of funding that you get, and they fund that, and it's very light touch. So we've got money from them for 2 years to kind of look at our business processes and rethink how we do them and how we make them more effective, as I say, for kind of less. And that means we've actually been able to bring in a couple of really brilliant young women to help us kind of take that forward, make it more contemporary, if you like, I guess, because I think both Zoe and I feel like we're a bit lacking in that department, and especially around social media. And we have a brilliant advisory board who've just got lots of ideas. So we've been working this year on kind of a restructuring with it very clearly in mind that it is about how we manage the whole organization. I think we'll still keep it quite informal. We don't really want to be that kind of, we don't want an office. We don't want full-time employees. I think it's really exciting to be doing that. So that's one thing. And then I'm 70 next year, and I decided that I quite like to shift direction. Or maybe it's not a shift in direction, maybe it's about a way of working or continuing my way of working in a different media. So last October, I started a part-time MA in fine art.
Oh.
In my case, I'm doing my own, I'm very much enjoying, although still feel very new to a different kind of creative practice. So I think with the same kinds of issues in it, but with the medium is so different. I'm really interested in kind of collage and mixed media. And so, yes.
Amazing.
So quite a big change.
How exciting is that, Jos? If you had a wand and you could change one thing, Jos, what would that be?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, it works at different levels, doesn't it? Because, in some ways it would be like removing inequality from the world as a whole, reversing the climate emergency, doing something about not demonizing, certain groups of people. But I think the main thing for me, and it obviously comes from the work that I do, so it's quite, in a way, it's quite particular. It's about how we have my wand would be to make a real paradigm shift where when we think about built spaces, we think about them in a way which is about really values our rich bio and neurodiversity. It's like, that's what it starts from. It's like, being different is fantastic. I learned so much from working with transgender people, neurodivergent people, people who are in some sort of disability category, that are somehow labeled as blind or wheelchair user, or who use their own creative work to kind of really push what the kind of stereotypes are there. So for me, and I don't know quite what it would be like or look like, but it is that we have a way of, we change the way that, and architecture works, I guess, to be much more equitable And I guess, you know, that has a huge political underpinning to it, which is, you know, a lot of the problem isn't the architect, it is that land and property are capitalist assets for exploitation and extraction. And so I guess, and it is something, you know, in DisOrdinary Architecture we'd like to think about how we also challenge what happens there.
Jos, I'm really grateful for this fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful to you for challenging the status quo continuously all throughout your life, for trying to bring about this paradigm shift and really trying to connect us more.
Fantastic. Thank you. And it's really great to talk to you, Stephanie. I really appreciate the things you're doing too with She Can. It's a great project.